Hey, all, welcome back to a Wednesday, August 21st, 2024 edition here on the Chase Thomas Podcast from still the aforementioned Chase Thomas coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. We've got a fun show for you guys today. We got full disclosures, Jimmy Hyams, Tennessee reporting legend, back on the pod here to talk all things Tennessee Vols football. Jimmy makes his Tennessee Vols season predictions on the program. We talk about why Oklahoma might be the season-defining game for Tennessee. Nico expectations for Jimmy, and what it means if Tennessee were to have a Heisman winning quarterback in the next 2 years, maybe win 9 or 10 games, 8 or 9 games, and not make the college football playoff in this 2-year window with Nico. How would the fans see that kind of run for Tennessee? So we talk about that a little bit, and then his guys to watch here: Chris Brazzell II and Joshua Josephs going into this 2024 Tennessee football season. So all that and more coming up next here on today's edition of the Chase Thomas Podcast. Don't forget, folks, you can watch this show on YouTube, youtube.com/Chase Thomas Podcast. Like and subscribe if you're watching this video right now. Helps other people find the show, and it helps this very show continue to grow. Drop a comment, share it, all the good stuff, as we're well over 2,000 subs on the YouTube channel and growing more and more each and every day. Full episodes, clips, shorts, all that good stuff over there on our YouTube channel. You can also listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or however you get your podcast. You can also leave us a 5-star rating and write us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your preferred podcast player, because you guessed it, it helps other people find this show, and it helps this very show continue to grow a little bit more each and every day here on this very program. You can get in touch with me at chasethomaspodcast@gmail.com and check out our homepage with all the information about the show, past episodes, and everything we got cooking here on this daily Tennessee Vols podcast, chasethomaspodcast.com. All right, Uncle Darren, let's go.
The Chase Thomas Podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas Podcast from still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Joining me, a legend also in parts unknown, Knoxville, Tennessee. The kind of retired, but not really retired, because the man just keeps popping up on things. Now he's a YouTube connoisseur. He's always evolving. Jimmy Hyams of Full Disclosure Productions. Jimmy, good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chase. I hope you are as well.
Absolutely. How goes the YouTube long form interview series? Like, what's been your favorite interview thus far?
It's hard to say because I've enjoyed so many of them. We started out, our first one was Roy Kramer, who gave a lot of insight into expansion back in 1992 in the SEC. We've had Heath Schuler. We've had Sterling Hinton. We have had Cade Mays that joined us. I'm sorry, Cooper Mays. I just interviewed Tim Irwin. So we got an interview with him. And I just left the house of Ben Testerman. He's the best junior tennis player the state's ever produced. And we're going to launch it when the U.S. Open starts next week. So we talked to him about his tennis career and how successful he was. So it's been a lot of fun so far to do this. And we've had probably around 1.6 million impressions with what we've done so far. So moving right along, but it's been a lot of fun, and I really enjoy doing sit-down, long-form interviews with people, and so and I'm learning a lot about them too. Some things they've told me that I didn't have any idea about.
Is there part of you that's like, once you wrap up the interviews, you're like, I kind of want to construct a story here. I want to kind of like figure out the nuts and bolts and see if I can craft like a long-form article, or is that part of you just kind of like, it's okay, I can leave it?
I've actually been writing articles to go with it. We just launched within the last week and a half. A website.
Okay.
So it's full.
Jimmy,
disclosure.
You're not doing the retirement stuff really well at all. Like this, you added now writing back. Like you're not doing this right.
We just we interviewed Holly Warlick, and so we talked about how she made the Olympic team in 1980, but was denied playing in the Olympics because Russia invaded Afghanistan. So I'm writing a little short story to go along with the interviews that we're doing. And so so it's a combination of that. So. So far, so good, and we'll see if we can continue that momentum into the football season.
Who's the one Tennessee athlete, sports? It doesn't even have to be athlete, but Tennessee sports figure that you've never interviewed that you've always wanted to interview?
Wow. Um, that's a really good one. I can't say that it's anybody over the last 39 or 40 years because I've interviewed about everybody. I tell you, who I would like to have interviewed. I've interviewed him since, but I would like to have interviewed him during his playing days, and that's Bernard King. I think he would have been a really fun interview. But, Guy, I've had a chance to interview a lot of the all-time greats, even players that played before I got here, like Condrich Holloway and Reggie White. I've interviewed Ron Whitby. So that's a tough one. If I had to go back and look at a coach, I never interviewed Ray Mears. I think that would have been fascinating to talk to him about coming from, what was it, like Wittenberg, Ohio to Tennessee and all the flair he brought, the promotional stuff that he did. He had a guy riding around on a unicycle, the recruitment of Ernie and Bernie. I think he would have been a fascinating interview. Never had a chance to catch up with him.
Who's your favorite current Tennessee sports figure interview? I feel like it's Tony Vitello, right? Like every Tony interview, he's just good. He's just really good at it.
He is terrific at it. So as far as the current group, he would have to rank very high on that list. Rick Barnes is pretty darn good too. I enjoy talking to him. So they would rank among the favorites of the current regime at Tennessee. So I'd have to put them in there. But I'll say this: the two interviews I did with the former quarterback Sterling Hinton and Heath Schuler, I thought they were dynamite. They were outstanding. They both told me stories I'd never heard of. One about Sterling Hinton, how he got into being a disc jockey. One about Heath Schuler, who dislocated all 5 toes playing on a baseball field in a football game, and told the doctor, "I want you to amputate all my toes. That's the only way I can move." And the doctor said, "No, I'm not doing that." So that was.
But he was serious.
Yeah, he seriously asked the doctor to amputate all his toes. So, yeah,
they're built different, Jimmy. They don't make them like Heath Schuler anymore. Because I don't know about you, but I'm not going down that road.
No, me either.
Goodness gracious. Well, that's awesome. Go subscribe to Full Disclosure Productions if you are not already, and keep up with Jimmy and Paige talking all things Vols. Long form. We got a website. We're writing. Jimmy's back in the full swing of things here. The retirement was short-lived, but we love it. First question for you, though. Your gut instinct, now that we're about 11 days of this recording before Tennessee kicks off their 2024 football season, your gut instinct on how this season ultimately goes for Tennessee.
I like this team. I think they're going to be really good. I think they'll be more entertaining than they were a year ago. Right now, I've got them pegged at 9-3, but if I had to lean in one direction, it would be more toward 10 wins instead of 8. I think the offense is going to be really good. I don't think they'll average 46 points, which they did 2 years ago, but I think they'll average a lot more points than the 31.8 that they averaged last year. I've got them averaging about 39 or 40 points. I think Nico's going to be really good. I like the receiver room a lot. I think the offensive line's adequate. I think the running backs are pretty good, not as good as a year ago, because I thought Jalen Wright was something special, and when you take him off the table. But I think the offense can average around 39 or 40, which will rank among the best in the FCC. The defense, I think, is going to be good. I thought it was good last year. I kind of think they were underrated. And I'll give you the numbers as to why I thought that. They ranked in the top 5 in the SEC in points allowed, total defense, run defense, sacks, tackles for loss. That's pretty good. And I think they can be even better this year, because I think their defensive line ranks among the best in the league. I think Keenan Peely at linebacker is going to be very helpful. I think he's a good football player. I don't think the secondary is going to be very good. It wasn't last year, and I don't think it'll be very good this year. But I think the other elements on defense, the front 7, if you will, I think will be really good.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up, because like one of the things I've been talking about on this show with different folks was that like I think the corner's gonna be better than a year ago. I think Jermon McCoy and Ricky Gibson are gonna be really good players, probably the best corner combination Tennessee's had, especially upside wise, since Heupel and company have been there. I tend to look at the safety stuff. Like Andre Turrentine, I think will be fine. I'm not really worried about that one. I think Will Brooks will be solid. When you look at the last 3 years, one of the things that, especially when you talk about the front 7, when fans are really starting to freak out about whether or not Will Brooks and Christian Harrison are going to be starting at star and free safety, like that's a big concern among the fan base of like, what does this look like for the secondary? I would argue that I don't think you're going to notice the secondary drop off until you're in those really the Georgia games, the Alabamas, the Floridas. I don't even think you'll really see it against Oklahoma. 5 new offensive linemen for Oklahoma versus this Tennessee front seven is brutal. I think that's just an underrated point where it's going to be on the road, but I don't see Oklahoma handling this front seven well at all. So I kind of lean Tennessee in that regard right now. I think where Tennessee, and you talk about the strides they made over the last 3 years and TFLs and sacks and things like that. The thing that still has not gotten cleaned up to the point where it can kind of separate them in those big games is the 3rd and 8. Right? They're actually really good in 3rd and short. Like this is a really good team when it's actually close on 3rd downs. 3rd and long, it's just been a disaster. And that's where I worry for this secondary is in those games against Florida at home, where Graham Mertz, number 2 in the nation last year in completion percentage. Like you saw Anthony Richardson had the ball with a chance to win 2 years ago when Tennessee was 11.5 point favorite against Florida at home. They're only, I think, 10 right now. So I think that's more of a coin flip game than even 2 years ago it was. And look, I think that's my concern is those guys where it's that bend don't break on the back end where they don't want to give it the big play. But then you can get diced. And we've seen like the Ole Miss game was an all-time great version of that where Matt Corral in 2021 just kept finding ways to get first downs on 3rd and long, and Tennessee just could not get off the field. They didn't get the big plays, but they can't get off the field and give their offense the ball back to get them in the game. I mean, that's my big concern. Do you feel the same? Because I don't think secondary comes up like 9 games for Tennessee this year, but I think there are probably 3 that I would circle where you got to get something. You got to have Boo out there. You've got to have a little bit of an upgrade because you're going to run into those same problems of just not being able to get off the field on 3rd and long.
Yeah, and I might have more than 3 on my ledger in that regard, but I do think the concern is, to me, is exactly what you said. If you need to hold on to a lead against somebody, and it's in the 4th quarter, can you stop somebody on 3rd and 8? Can the secondary make a play? They didn't make plays last year. They didn't make a whole lot of plays the year before. Yeah. So that's a concern to me about their ability. What might have to happen is that while somebody's got 3rd and 8, you might have to sack somebody.
Yeah.
That might be how you stop them. But I'm not that enamored with this group. I know that Will Martinez, the secondary coach, has talked about how talented he is, how much he loves this room. Okay, I need to see it. Now, I think you may be right about the corners. I think the corners have a chance to be pretty good. But here's what bothers me a little bit, Chase. And as much as I've hammered the secondary for not being that efficient the last 2 years. So they lost 11 players, not counting Jordan Thomas, who's out, but they lost 11 players from the roster. I think 3 of them went to the NFL. 6 of them signed with Power 4 schools. So does that mean Tennessee didn't get the best out of those players? If they were good enough to go to, I don't know, Louisville or Ole Miss or wherever, Arizona, or did those schools that brought them aboard make a mistake? I don't know. But for that many of them to go to a Power 4 school makes me wonder about Tennessee's ability to get the most out of their defensive backs.
I think it's definitely something that's going to be at the top of mind for every Tennessee fan. It's kind of funny, like where we're at right now, because if you look everywhere else on this roster, I think they're pretty deep. I mean, I guess it's probably for me the only 2 areas of weakness right now is probably the back end for the secondary, and then probably the depth of the offensive line. Like the recruiting on the offensive line has been fantastic. Like I'm not worried. Like in 2025, 2026, they're rolling. I think they're going to have some guys hurt in year 2. We'll see if David Sanders starts right away. But you got Bennett Warren. You've got a lot of dudes coming in here, and I think they're going to be able to figure out mix and match, and they're going to be okay on the offensive line next year and going forward. This year, my big concern is what happens if Andre Karich and John Campbell miss a lot of time again. And John Campbell was not available down the stretch last year. He's been they're being really cautious with him this summer and into fall camp. He's not at left tackle anymore, so that's less of a concern for Nico's blind side. But you're going Dane Davis again. Like he's the swing tackle. You're not like, it doesn't feel like you're going to go true freshman there. Bennett Warren, whoever, Gage Ginther. You're maybe Sham, who's been in the program for a couple of years now, but he's in the mix at left guard, so maybe he swings a certain way. But I don't know. I look at it as like this top 5, the starting 5 on the offensive line for Tennessee will be really good if they're able to be healthy for the full season. But if they get hit with some injuries, I mean, Cooper alone, like Dane Davis is like apparently going to be the backup center too. So Dane Davis might get more starts than over half of this offensive line just by nature of injuries and everything else and how important he is. But that's my big concern is just with how much last year. I mean, you look at the Florida game of not having Cooper there. That's a difference between back-to-back 10-win seasons, maybe, with how that game went. So I don't know. Is that a fair concern on your end too? It's just behind the starting five in the offensive line. There are huge question marks, at least only in 2024 for the Vols.
And Cooper Mays, to me, is the biggest one. No disrespect to the other offensive linemen, but you noted it. When Tennessee played at Florida, they didn't have Cooper Mays. They looked lost. They looked disoriented. They couldn't move the football against the Florida team that wasn't very good. I think he's their most important offensive lineman. You could argue whether he's the most talented, but I think he's the most important. Also, by the way, I've seen him on a couple of second-team All-America teams. So he's a really good football player, and he's kind of the quarterback of that group up front. I do think the tackles have talent. They got to stay healthy. I'm a little bit worried about the guard position. You mentioned Carrick. There's Jackson Lampley at that left guard spot. I don't know if Spraggins is going to be 100% at the beginning of the year. He came out that torn MCL. It was pretty significant. But I do think the starting group is going to be fine.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. I just don't think they can afford injuries. And one of the things that I got to ding the staff on a little bit, they have actually recruited and signed some pretty good offensive linemen. But how many have they actually developed?
Yeah. I mean, still zero. He doesn't have a long-term starter, Glenn Ellerby, to this point. There is not one right now that he brought in, that he developed and is a long-term starter. Yeah. Addison Nichols, he talked about, he's now going to start at center, it looks like, for Arkansas. 4-star from JC. I
liked him. I thought he was a good football player, and then he's gone. But they've not been able to go out and sign offensive linemen, develop them, and have them turn into good players. Cooper Mays was signed by a previous staff. The tackles are transfers. That concerns me a little bit. Now, I do think they have signed some really good offensive lineman prospects for down the road, but they can do a better job of developing those guys.
Absolutely. Which game do you think will ultimately be the season definer when you look at it? When you look at the schedule and your gut instinct here, what do you think we look back, I mean, let's say January of 2025, when we look back on the season, what do you think will ultimately be the season-defining game for Tennessee?
Oklahoma. A huge game. I think playing at Oklahoma, you got Bob Stoops, who fired Josh Heupel. There's no question that Heupel's got that one circled on his schedule. I think he'd like to win that one about as much as any game he's got. But I think that could be one that's a swing game. I think in NC State now, I'm not giving them that game, but I think Oklahoma's an SEC game, is a first true road trip game. I think that's a big one. If you can get by Oklahoma and NC State, and you're undefeated in the month of September, I think that really puts you in a position of going 10-2. If you lose one of those games, I think you're 9-3 at best. And the reason I say that is, if you're not good enough to beat NC State and Oklahoma, I don't think you're good enough to beat Alabama or Georgia. The other thing that concerns you a little bit, Chase, each of the last 2 years, Tennessee has gone on the road and laid an egg. And they actually laid two of them last year, one at Florida, one at Missouri. The year before, they laid an egg at South Carolina. Is there a road game where they might go out and just flop like they've done a couple other times? That's keeping me from predicting this to be a 10-win season. But if they can avoid that, maybe they can, but if they can avoid that, I do think if they get out of September undefeated, 10 wins is on the table.
It's funny you say that because I agree. I think if they are sitting at the Florida game undefeated, I think two things. They're a 10-win team, and I think they're a CFP lock. Because then you look at, because a 10-win Tennessee team is going to be in the college football playoff. Like, I think that they're getting it. So if you can get through this road test, because that's one of the issues I have with this schedule, because when people look from the outside of like, oh, this is an easier schedule, Tennessee should be able to do a lot with this. One of my issues, I guess I have a two-part issue, and I wonder if you agree, is Josh Heupel's lost one home game in the last 2 years. It was against the best program in the country, a team that's not lost a regular season game since 2019 against South Carolina and Georgia. So that was it. Like, it was ugly last year at home, but that was it in the last 2 years. Fans, when they go into Neyland in the Heupel era, most of the time have been like, all right, I'm going to go see my team win. That's just been kind of the expectation. I think there's a lot of reasons as to why that is, but I think one of the underrated ones is this offense and style with how big and intimidating Neyland is already. you get down against this Tennessee offense with this fan base and everything. It puts a lot of pressure and things can unravel, like it did for South Carolina and Spencer Rattler last year with the pick six and Kamal. Because I mean, I was in the building for that. That was the loudest it was all year long. I think was after that pick six. But I think the Oklahoma game. I want it could be the LSU game of 2 years ago, where you go into that one where I think a lot of fans just kind of penciled in as like, it's going into Death Valley. I don't feel good about that one. And like, let's see what we can do. We should beat Pitt, which is kind of like the NC State game to start things off. It's like, you feel good. You should beat the ACC team. And then you see where you're at. But I'm looking at the Oklahoma game as like, what time does this game kick off? Because Tennessee lucked out at 11 a.m. kick for LSU. I don't know if that game goes that way at Death Valley at night.
Yes.
I am hoping Tennessee Oklahoma is an 11 a.m. Central Time kick, because I feel a lot better about that game if that's a morning-ish game, because I think it has a chance of being the college game day game when you look at that weekend slate and what that game might mean, and just where both teams are at that point. That is the main concern for me. Am I overthinking it of like, if Oklahoma's a night game, like the ABC game day, like I'm a lot more concerned about Tennessee being able to go in, because that's what we saw with Florida last year. That's what we've seen with Tennessee against South Carolina 2 years ago. Those were night road SEC games. The fan bases were really rowdy. It was just a really, really tough atmosphere, and Tennessee laid an egg in both those two circumstances. That is my big concern going to Oklahoma, is like, what time? I need to know what time of day this game is for me to pick it, almost.
No, I think that's a really good point, and I agree with you on the LSU deal. In another lifetime, I covered LSU football.
Mm-hmm.
I know the difference of a morning kickoff versus a 3:30 kickoff versus a night kickoff.
Yep.
There's no question that there's a different atmosphere and a different LSU team that shows up. I would not be surprised if it was similar for Oklahoma. So I do Tennessee can get Oklahoma in an early game and have a good start. Crowd's not into it. Makes it a whole lot easier to win that game. You play a night game in Norman and the fans are into it. They've had a chance to prepare properly with liquid refreshments.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it a whole lot harder. So I think the kickoff for Oklahoma is very important. I think that's a good point on your part.
Do you think Tennessee has to ultimately sweep Florida and Alabama to make the college football playoff?
No.
Okay.
Got to beat Florida. But
I think you have to beat Florida if you want a chance to beat Bama, right? Because the bad juju, if Tennessee lays an egg against Florida, you don't have a week to like get back. You don't have a bye week. You don't have a Kent State right after to kind of bounce back. You got to get up off the mat, and you're playing a better team the week after. Like that to me is like, if you lose to Florida, I look at Alabama as just this season can get ugly in a hurry, right?
Yeah. And you should beat Florida. Florida's not very good. Now, I've said this for about 20 years. Typically, Florida plays one of its 2 or 3 best games against Tennessee, and Tennessee typically plays one of its 2 or 3 worst games against Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that happened last year. Florida wasn't any good, and Tennessee went down there and got whipped. So, yeah, you need to win that game. You're better than Florida. You need to cast this whatever jinx or whatever you want to call it aside and get that win. But if you don't beat what I think is a pretty average Florida team, I mean, 4 losses is certainly on the table.
Oh, yeah. I think it's definitely on the table if you drop the Florida game. Final 2 here for you, Jimmy. Something I've been thinking about, like, what if Nico is great these next 2 seasons? Let's say he wins a Heisman in one of these 2 seasons, but they don't make the college football playoff in either of these 2 seasons. How do you think the fan base will view, based on your years of experience covering this fan base and having a good feel for them long term, how do you think they would approach that scenario? Because I think that is actually really on the table for the next 2 years for Tennessee.
Disappointed. Disappointed. And look, the fan base is gaga over Nico right now. I mean, they love him. They think he's going to be, some of them think he's going to be the greatest quarterback Tennessee's ever had. I'm not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's going to be any better than Hendon Hooker was in 2022. I think it'd be more like the 2021 version of Hendon Hooker, but I think he's going to be really good. But if you go out there and you score 40 points a game and you go 9-3 back-to-back years and you don't make the college football playoff, that's disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
If you think you've got one of the best quarterbacks in the country.
I wonder what the kind of heat, because I've talked to some different friends in this industry, and one of the things I'm most curious about is just that, like, Heupel's riding the wave right now. he's going into year 4. He's exceeded expectations. He's also recruiting at the highest level he ever has here.
Yeah.
Part of what happens when you recruit to this level now for Tennessee, the expectations rise. Like, he hasn't really dealt with, I mean, last year, I think even most fans, we were talking about it before the year, everyone was expecting a drop off. Like, it wasn't like Tennessee fans were expecting Tennessee to be just as good as they were in 2022 with Hendon Hooker. They were expecting a little bit of a fall back down to earth, 8-4, 9-3, and they were okay with that. Like, I don't think any Tennessee fans were upset about 9-4 last year. They were like, hey, that's good. We got through it. It was a gap year. It's fine. We'll bounce back and be okay. I think with the amount of hype with Nico Iamaleava and what they're bringing in on the recruiting trail over the next couple of years, there is so much pressure, I think, bubbling beneath the surface at Tennessee. It doesn't mean they have to win a national title, but they have to make a college football playoff in the next 2 years to sustain this growth. Or you're looking at a situation where, I'm not saying Heupel will be on the hot seat after 2 years, but there will be a lot more questions, whispers of like, all right, is he going to get over the hump? Are we in the Mark Richt zone at Tennessee now, where it's like, yeah, he's raised the floor significantly, but we just maybe got through 2 years with the best quarterback in the 21st century at Tennessee without a playoff game to show for it. So, yeah, the numbers were great, or he won a Heisman, or this, that, and the other. But if we don't make a playoff in the next 2 years in this added 12-team format, are they going to start to wonder a little bit? And I think fans actually will start to wonder and start to get a little bit nervous about what the ceiling really is in this era if they can't get to at least one appearance in the next 2 years.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, you would have easily made it 2 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. So why can't you repeat that, or at least have something get in the playoffs one of the next 2 years or both years?
Mm-hmm.
So I do think if they don't get in the college football playoff either the next 2 years, there'll be a lot of grumbling about Josh Heupel. Now, the caveat to that would be, okay, Nico gets hurt, or there's an ungodly number of injuries. Okay, maybe you can pass that off. But if you stay relatively healthy, I do think that the fan base would question whether or not Heupel can get him, not necessarily to the mountaintop, but at least in the mix.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's important to get in there. Now, do I think Texas and Oklahoma can make it harder? Texas definitely, Oklahoma probably. But still, you got to get there. And I agree with what you said earlier. If you're 10-2 at Tennessee, you're going to get in the college football playoff. So that's you got to be able to do that. And I think it's reasonable to expect Tennessee to be able to do that one of the next 2 years, or both.
Final thing for you, Jimmy. Your player that you think will surprise folks this year. Who have you latched on to? You're like, this is the Tennessee player that I've got circled. He's gonna be my James Pierce this year, where he comes out of nowhere and really, really surprise some folks.
I got two in mind, and I'll take one on offense. Watch Chris Brazzell, the Tulane transfer.
Yeah.
He's about 6'5". He's a gazelle. He can run. He's a hard worker. He's not going to disappoint like Dante Thornton did the year before. I think he's going to be big time. On defense, watch for Joshua Josephs.
Mm-hmm.
He's opposite. Now, that depends on how much they play him, because right now he's behind James Pierce. But if you're in a passing situation, he needs to be on the field.
Yeah.
And so I think he's a guy. He actually was ahead of Pierce 2 years ago. Pierce went way past him last year. Josephs even said he was jealous of that. I think he's a guy that may come in and get 7 or 8 sacks and be disruptive and have a breakout year for Tennessee. So those would be my two guys.
Josephs is interesting too, because like you talk about Pierce in the breakout, like Pierce only started 2 games, 3 games. Roman Harrison was on the field for a bunch of snaps. He was, I think, top 5 in snaps for Tennessee a year ago. Tennessee's pass rush was unbelievable last year, and Roman Harrison was not a sack guy. Like, he was solid in his own right, but he was undersized. He just wasn't he was okay. No, this year they're only going to have pass rushers. Like, they're just going to have this rotation of Pierce, Josephs, Herring, and Jordan Ross. I mean, good luck with these Leos that they're going to be able to rotate. I mean, do you remember in your years of covering Tennessee football, like, ever having this amount of pass rushers that they could rotate like this?
Not off the top of my head, I can't. I mean, they had some great defenses, that I'm not sure if they've had that many that could get after a quarterback like that. I tell you something else to watch for as well. Omar Norman Lott had, was it 5.5 or 6 sacks last year?
Yeah.
He's a really good pass rusher inside, and you need that. He's a better inside pass rusher than Amari Thomas.
Yeah.
And I think Thomas is a really good player. watch for Lott. I think he's a guy also that could have a big year, and it won't necessarily always be his sack total.
Mm-hmm.
It could be him flushing the quarterback out of the pocket to allow Pierce or Josephs or somebody else to make a sack.
I love it. Jimmy, what can the good folks check out from you and the team over at Full Disclosure Productions this week?
We got Tim Irwin. Part 2 of that is going to be running on Thursday. Next Thursday, we got Ben Testerman, the greatest junior tennis player in Tennessee history, state of Tennessee. And that will debut in that one during the U.S. Open tennis tournament in New York. So that's what we got lined up for the next couple of weeks. So hopefully folks will check it out and subscribe on YouTube.
I love it. Jimmy, keep up the great work. Try and do some retirement stuff, Jimmy. Try and do some retirement stuff. Get some fishing in, some golfing. I know you're a golf guy. Because the football season's right around the corner. Oh, are you prepared? Is the wife jumping in here like, Jimmy? With I know football season's coming up. What do we got to do here?
Yeah, I think she likes me getting out of the house.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, that all works out. Jimmy Hyams, thank you so much. We'll have to check back in again soon.
Thanks, Chase. Take care.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.